Joining me today are two legends of the British game and subject of my first and last football argument during my school days. It's Peter Withe and Browne Little.
To be here, interested to see how we're going to get on. We do lots of things together over the years, and the only thing we never did was we play alongside each other too often, really, which would have been a nice thing. But no, it's great to be here and looking forward to it.
Well, let's start at playing together with each other. Once in a testimonial, you played against each other for Birmingham City and Aston Villa.
He'll know.
We played with each other
in a testimonial.
In his testimonial game, because he's finished his career.
Yeah.
And that was the only time that we played together.
Exactly, yeah.
And
but against Pete, you played against each other, you for Birmingham City and Browne for Aston Villa. Trust me, you did.
Okay.
Trust me.
In
fact, there was a corner that Chris Nicholl was going to get his head onto it and you intercepted it and it went back out for a Villa corner.
Okay.
100%.
Which year was that then?
1975-76 season.
It would be, yeah.
In fact, I think it was the game that you scored the winning goal, Browne.
Yeah, Kenny Burns.
Yeah.
I took the ball. Well, I didn't even take the ball off him. He sort of lost the ball right on the edge of the box. Yeah. And a side footer didn't. If Peter played that game, well, I definitely played that game. So you might remember whether you played that game as well. But yeah. I often have a little look at that every now and again just to remind myself.
Do you reminisce much about the good old days? Because we're going to talk about that. I also want to go back to the beginning of your careers, because your careers were very different in how they started. Pete, you in 1971 were playing for Southport and you were on the docks, Liverpool, is that correct? And Browne, you'd just come down from Newcastle as an apprentice and made your debut at age 17 for Aston Villa. So,
well, that in itself for me was a sort of a massive thing. You know, at 15-year-old, I leave home and you know I was very quiet. Yeah. Didn't know a thing about anything. At the time, I was living in a place called Peterlee, which is in County Durham, born in Newcastle, but I lived in a little sort of mining town. Left home at 15. Fortunately, I was in digs with a lad who looked after me, a lad called Roy Stark, who was the same age as me, but was more of a man than I was. You know what I mean? He was big and strong, and I was sort of small and very quiet. To think that 2 years on from there, I'd changed completely and I was playing in the first team was just incredible, really. Yeah. So, I think leaving home at 15 was something I always wanted to do. I don't know why, but I'd never even cleaned my own shoes by the time I was 15. So I left home and was then thrown into the world of football, which was a real eye-opener, to be honest.
Now, Pete, your first journeys into football, really different. In fact, your journey into the professional game was via South Africa and America, and then Wolverhampton Wanderers in 1973, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, because I started. I was playing in Liverpool for 3 teams. So I played on a Wednesday in the Business House League. I played on a Saturday for the Wakes team, who I couldn't get a game for, and then I played on a Sunday for the Sunday team. Yeah. The Saturday team, I used to play. I ended up playing in goal because we didn't have a goalkeeper, so I said I'll play in goal. And then on the Wednesday, I used to play left midfield, and on the Sunday, I used to play left wing. So I played in all the positions, as it were, until I got to Southport, and then I started sort of professionally at Southport. In fact, the day I signed my first professional contract was the day my son was born, Jason, on 16th. Of August 1971. I actually signed a professional contract. Didn't last very long, right? But it was there. And then went via Preston, Barrow, South Africa, and then Wolves.
In 1973, you played for 3 different teams, didn't you?
Yes.
Port Elizabeth being one of them.
Yeah.
How was that time briefly in South Africa for you? Because there was apartheid going on. There was, I don't think South Africa could play Test cricket, but there were a number of footballers, certainly in the 50s. I think Peter Franklin played over there as well. How did you figure with South Africa?
Well, South Africa was one of them places that everyone was sort of going to play. Like Johnny Haynes was playing in South Africa when I went there. But every team had at least 4 or 5 players, ex-players. So Terry Wharton was playing out there, ex-Wolves. Yeah. So we had loads. We had Tony Coleman, we had them sort of players. And then other players went out. George Easton was playing out there in South Africa. So there was a lot of players playing. There was apartheid at the time.
Yeah.
We as Brits, as it were trying to just do what we do and just ignore apartheid. Just try and get on with people the same way as what we got on with people all over the world. So that was difficult. Funnily enough, my wife was saying that she took Jason to a park once. Yeah. Because a lot of the mothers worked out there and the fathers worked out there, so the children were looked after by nannies.
Yeah.
But they all had to sit together, and she had to sit on her own. She couldn't go and sit with them because you could be arrested for that sort of thing over there. So it was difficult, but it was amazing how sort of you sort of got on with it.
Yeah. And
I was just a young 20-year-old who just wanted. I was the youngest player in the team, both teams. And I always remember there was the lad. I went to Port Elizabeth, and the manager who signed me, when I landed, he was taking off on a plane flying back to the UK.
Okay.
So Billy Haydock, his name was. He played with me at Southport. So he was flying back. So I had him as a manager. Then I had another manager. Then I had another manager. This is all in one season, by the way.
Sounds like the Premier League now, doesn't it?
And then I had a fella called Matt Crowe.
Okay.
And Matt Crowe used to play for Norwich. And I always remember him. We were playing against Durban, and they were playing me in midfield because I could run. And I wasn't scoring goals at the time. The only club in my career that I wasn't scoring goals for. So I played in midfield. And I always remember trying to nick this ball. One of the players was coming through, and I missed time. He sort of put his leg up a bit higher, and then all I could hear was this manager from the side, Matt Crowe, shouting and screaming. So I was like, made a little bit of an expletive. So in the end, we come in at half time, we're 0-0. We're playing Durban United, one of the top teams, and we're 0-0, and we're bottom of the league at the time. And I always remember coming in thinking, we've done well here, boys, and him saying to me, you ever say anything to me? And I'm like, what's he on about? So he said, you haven't even played for anyone in it. And that was like red rag to a bull to me. As soon as he said that, you haven't played for anyone, I remember getting hold of my shirt like that, and I got it to my shoulders like this because I was going to take the shirt off and just throw it on him, basically. And two of the lads either side of me said, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Leave him. So in the end, that was probably the only manager that I ever actually wanted to knock him out because of, comments like that to me, coming from Liverpool, to say you haven't played for anyone, was like, if you don't play for anyone, you can't play for your team.
Who was the next manager that you felt like knocking out? Was there any others during your career? Because you played for about 25, didn't you?
Yes, there's loads of the 25. I wouldn't say there's 25 of them, but I would say that, not knockout, but I think that there's some managers like Willie Bell. Unfortunately, Willie Bell was a great, nice person.
And coach.
Just with regards to his management, management, sadly it lacked a little bit, and he was probably one of the ones. Yeah. In fact, I always remember my last game that I played. He decided to play me on the left wing against West Bromwich Albion. Yeah. And I remember, because we had two tunnels.
Yeah, we did.
So we had one in the corner and one in the centre. And I always remember running up, and my last game was went up the tunnel, down the road, and ended up in Nottingham Forest. So that was my last game. And then we were playing, the following week, we were playing Villa. Yeah. At Villa Park, and we're all preparing for the game, because big game against Aston Villa. And I always remember on the Friday, he pulled me to one side and he said to me, in his very low voice, Scottish low voice, I'm selling you to Nottingham Forest. And I was like, what? We're playing Villa tomorrow. Yeah. And he went, no, you're going up the road. And that was basically my last time that I played.
Brian, your first manager was Tommy Docherty, wouldn't it have been?
Tommy Docherty and Arthur Cox's assistant, yeah.
How didn't that work at Villa for the Doc? Because when you look at, my understanding is that, and I'm not a Villa supporter, I'm Birmingham City through and through, but my understanding is Tommy took you down, didn't he?
Yeah, that first season, yeah. As a 15-year-old boy, I went to Villa in the second division and watched them get relegated. I mean, I think there's only one game sticks out in my head which would be in Huddersfield Town. I think we beat them 4-1 at Villa Park, and everybody was going, right, we've turned the corner now. Yeah. But we never did. And as a young kid, I mean, I used to be the T-boy in the first team dressing room, so I was like privy to a lot of the arguments that were going on, and I always found that fascinating, because I taught myself to look, to listen, and to learn a lot when I was a kid. Because you just, in 1969, here I am, 15-year-old in a first team dressing room that's struggling. Yeah. So you learn a hell of a lot. You see, I can still see arguments and good fun as well. I can still see how the mess, but you could sense. I mean, as a kid, I'm sitting and listening to them moaning about the manager and all sorts of things, and there was no harmony in the dressing room at all. So, I got that. So I recognised that it just didn't work for Tommy. I don't know. I mean, I've met him several times since, and always got on quite well. But he didn't. He had a lot of trouble with quite a few of the players. He would take them away on a Friday night, and a lot of the lads didn't like that in those days. I remember things like that. He used to keep them away. It was very fractured. The whole dressing room. Nobody was really happy. And at that time, they'd signed Bruce Rioch for £100,000, which was the record signing. And it was only basically when the likes of Vic Crow came in that he began to get some sort of harmony in the dressing room. But there was always I always remember as a kid thinking, "Whoa, crikey, why? They're not happy. They're moaning their bag off." And yet there I am, like thinking this is great in the first team dressing room, listening to them, all of their jokes and everything in those days, and watching the pros cutting people's socks up and hanging them, and the big fight was going on, and some of them were laughing in a cut. Just the whole it was like a theatre, the first team dressing room. For me as a kid, it was like a theatre. You're looking in there, you're thinking, you'd say Pat McMahon would just be singing, Dick Edwards would sing in the corner, and that's all they did. They just loved singing. You get Barry Hall sitting in the other corner lighting a cigarette up and sitting there smoking his cigarettes. And it was for me, as I've said, for a young kid leaving home, going into that dressing room, sitting there, you're just thinking, wow, what's going on here in the world? And then I got the Tommy Docherty, Arthur Cox, very strict, very, very, very strong, and a lot of them didn't like it, So it was a difficult dressing room, but one which educated me unbelievably, so much so that it's affected my managerial days when I was older. I learned so much in that first year; it was untrue. But yes, I as a kid watched a dressing room that was very fractured, with a manager and an assistant who Arthur I've got to know really well over the years. I mean, Arthur was manager at Derby when I was manager at Leicester, and there was somebody I looked up to as a 15-year-old. I'm actually on the same level with them all of a sudden. So there's lots of things that happened in that first period that have stayed with me all my life, but especially the dressing room. Yeah. But yes, it was fractured, and it taught me about a fractured dressing room being very much the basis on failure, really.
But I guess going down to the third division, I'd be amazed if that was a harmonious dressing room.
No, yeah.
But Tommy did take Chelsea down to the second division. I mean, he'd got Jimmy Greaves at the time, and he took over from Ted Drake at Chelsea, but bought them up and had Docherty's Diamonds. He got a group of youngsters that he turned into one of the most charismatic football clubs in the history of British football in Chelsea. He could have possibly done it to you guys at Aston Villa, because he didn't. Chico Hamilton, was it Tommy that brought Chico? Because he was at Chelsea as well.
They'd signed Bruce Rioch and his brother Neil. They'd signed Chico Hamilton, and they'd signed Pat McMahon. Those were the four major signings as it was that year, and Bruce was the record signing. I mean, Chico was a great lad. But I mean, daft as a brush, he was great. they were funny, he comes into that category. Him and Neil Rioch and them, they just loved the night out. They loved the nightlife, and it was so there was all those categories. Like as a kid, I'm looking at and I'm seeing the serious side of it. The Bruce Riochs, the Ray Gradens, the Jeff Bowdens. There was the serious ones. There was the daft ones. There were the ones who used to mess people around and cut their socks up And as a kid walking in there, just getting shouted at, cup of tea over here, son, 3 sugars, and also, all that I was getting thrown at me. It's an unbelievable place, and I don't think there's that type of that doesn't happen. I mean, there's still fun in a dressing room. I'm not saying there's no character, but that you go back into 1969 for me. And then a Friday sticks in my head more than anything else when the team sheets used to go up. And you know, you'd finish training and everybody sat around for an hour and a half before the first team sheet come on, the second team sheet was hung up, and the A team and the youth team. So it was 4 teams. And at senior level, you could see the disappointment in the senior places if they were in the reserve team, because they were going to pay for like £1 win bonus. Whereas if you were in the first team, you got appearance money and you got win bonus. So you've got married men who, you know, in the late 20s, 30s, who were going to the next day play for £1 for playing in the Central League, as opposed to, you know, doubling their wages because their appearance money was pretty much the same as their basic. And so you had that created atmosphere in itself. The fact that so many of them, and there was no subs in those days, so you were either in the first team, second team, youth team, or A team. End of story. And that pinning of the, you know, you'd wait for that hour, and then when the coaches walked in pinning the teams, there was this big rush to the team sheets, and then there was a massive disappointment, and you could see people chucking their boots across the dressing room. They're not in the first. It was just that basic, you know. There was no planning about. Nobody's going out and practicing how we're going to play the next day. Friday morning was just like a training session, and then you sat there and waited for your team sheets to go up, you know. So sports science and all that just wasn't there in those days.
You had the team sheet after the training session.
You'd wait till about 1 o'clock, because when we'd finished in the morning, used to be I would be the tea boy, so I'd be sitting there pouring tea for everybody. But the players would be, some of them, like I say, they'd sit there having a cigarette, they'd go in the bath, they'd come out, some would be ready, some would still be sitting in their kit waiting for that team sheet to go up. And there's only 11 people on that team sheet. You know, and if you were Newcastle at home, you were Newcastle away with the reserves. And there was, so it was you'd gone from the highest point to the lowest point in 10 seconds once you've seen where your name was. And that's for the senior players, not for us kids. But I used to witness senior players chucking their boots across the room, you know, and swearing, she's going to kill me, I'm not getting paid this week, and you know, and all those things like that. So it was a really cutthroat thing, and you look back, and those sort of things educate you. When you've stayed in the game, you've become educated because of it, because you want to realise, how do I get away from anything that I'm going to do that's more modern, but make sure I'm not creating that atmosphere of hatred all of a sudden. Because all those things have helped me in 50 years of football, really, you know. But them early things are massive. They're massive in your mind, aren't they? And they're massive in your education of the game, aren't they, Pete?
Well, it's the same. When I was at Wolves, it was the same.
Yeah.
In them days, it was Sam H. Young used to come in, and the 3 things we pinned up: first team, reserve team, youth team. And as Brian said, the youth team would kick off at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then the reserves, wherever the first team were playing, you were playing at home or away, and you were kicking off at 3. Everyone kicked off at 3 o'clock. And we were the same. I always remember that the 2 strikers that we had was Dugan and Richards. But we had 8 strikers for them 2 positions. So we had the likes of Alan Sunderland, Steve Kinden, Peter Eastoe, Norman Bell, myself. So we had like loads of players, and we were all sort of always disappointed. I always remember that Alan Sunderland, Dugan had got injured, and Alan Sunderland had got in the side at the time and was playing really well. And of course, we as youngsters, we all sat in one corner. So all the 21-year-olds, all the, you know, the lads sat in the one corner, and all the senior ones were all around the sort of. And Dugan and Richards was over the far side, and I always remember Alan Sunderland was playing really well. He played about 4. So of course we'd all jump up straight away to look at in the reserves again, you know. And Alan Sunderland just sat there, and he was like, well, I'm in the first team, you know. I've been. So we all got up. We all looked back at him, and we said, "You're not in, you know." And he went, "What?" He said, "He's put that old one Dugan in again." So we all went and gave him a little bit of a helping hand, saying, "I wouldn't stand for that. If I was you, I wouldn't stand."
You ain't going to go toe to toe with the Duke, though, are you?
I wouldn't stand for that. I'd actually go and see him. So we're all winding him up. So all of a sudden, he screamed down the. The Wolves had this. You went down the corridor, went to the end, cut round the sort of side and then double back on yourself to get to the manager's door. So he went down, screaming down there, turned the corner. When he got to the bottom, we'd all followed him. Then we heard him banging on the door, and the voice says, "Come in." So he opens the door and he comes in. He says, "What do you want?" So we're at the door now listening. So he starts screaming and shouting. So he says, "I can't believe," he said, "I'm not in the team." And so he looks at, just takes one look at him, and he says the magic words of, "Get out!" And he goes, "Thanks, boss. Thanks for seeing me."
Yeah.
And then come down, we were all in the dressing room. He said, "I told him." But
in a fashion.
That was the way it was. It was in them days. Was just, you looked for that. Not in the team, no.
But reserve team football, I know you weren't playing in front of many when you're playing in the Central League, and Birmingham used to play in the football combination, but you learnt so much surely by playing against men, playing against players that wasn't in the first team, rather than today it's like 17s play with the 17s, 19s play with the 19s, the youth are in their own. But like you've alluded to earlier, I mean, I do a show with Alan Hudson. Tommy used to take, because he used to play with Michael in the youth team, so Tommy used to take Alan when he was 16 away with Chelsea, pretty much like you, and Alan says to me, "I learnt so much." Absolutely. And then reserve team football, you learnt so much. You learnt the ways of the old pros, whereas kids today, I don't think they're having the same background as Pete when you come through in your manner, and Brian when you come through in your... In fact, I think kids today have it too easy, too soon.
Well, I'll back that up and endorse that 100%, because when I was 15, my first game in the reserve team was at Man United. Yeah. And I'm 15, I've travelled up on the bus, I'm excited because I'm in the Central League at 15, I'm playing with all the lads who are, pro players who were gutted really. But we get to the ground and the coach comes and says to me, "Right, you're playing against and I could run. I mean, that's one thing I could do. I could run.
You could play
I played midfield those days as if in my first year. He said, "Right, you're playing against a player who doesn't want to be out there today, and he's a little bit old, and you won't get and he won't get anywhere near. You'll run the socks off him." I said, "Okay, what's his name?" He said, "Paddy Crerand." Well, they carried me off after 60 minutes. They carried me off the pitch after 60 minutes. Yeah. I couldn't get near him. Yeah. And Paddy Crerand to this day and would say, "No, he couldn't run very far, could he? It wasn't very quick." Yeah. And I've seen Paddy so many times in years to come, and I've said, and he now looks and laughs at me when he sees, because I know what you're going to say. You played against me when you were a kid, and you hadn't got a clue. But that's what it was, and I was educated in 60 minutes of football. Yeah. I was educated about, you don't really have to run a million miles to affect a game. It helps if you can run, of course, but I just couldn't get near him. Yeah. I just, you go home on nights like that as a kid and you're sitting there thinking, "God, how good have I got to be to get up there?" But he was absolutely incredible. I couldn't get near him. So you learn, and because they were closer in those days. Going back to my 15-year-old again, my first day at Aston Villa, we all trained together. And I was thinking, we'd be off on our own somewhere. No. 30-odd pros, 15 apprentices, all training together. And again, it was the hardest day of my life. But if I look back on it, I started to grow up. I went home after 3 months of being an apprentice. And I went back to my little sports centre at Peterlee, and I was so different to all my friends who were still, obviously we're all 15, but I'd grown up in 3 months. I was so different to them, it was untrue, because I was in a works environment, in a men's environment. We have kids in it, and I've got a 15-year-old now and a 15-year-old 16. The thought of them leaving home today, I personally don't think they could survive, because society has changed so much. But you're just thrown in at the deep end. But wow, I don't think I'd swap my grown-up period in football, and I bet you wouldn't either. And yes, there are different things now, and there are so many things going on in the world which are politically correct and everything, and but I saw things at 15 that I wouldn't want my 15-year-old lad to see, in dressing rooms. But you grew up on the back of it as well. So there has to be a happy medium somewhere. I agree with you. 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-olds playing against 19, 17-year-old. Playing against your own age group all the time isn't going to be that beneficial for you. You have to learn, and you will learn a little bit more by being a little bit more diverse. But I don't know. I think at the moment there has to be a change. I mean, the best of the best get there at 17 anyway. But it is becoming more difficult for like a kid like me who was quiet but had a talent, obviously. Because you think, we've got to just keep him with them because he's not ready for that yet. That's supposedly. But sometimes by throwing them in, it's surprising what they would come up with, and I think that still is the case. There could be, a lot of lads who are a little bit more quiet, who the coaches would say, no, look, he's not ready for that yet. But perhaps he is. Yeah. Perhaps he needs that to bring it out of him, and I think that is something that isn't tried and tested enough these days.
70s, I'm talking to strikers, what a wonderful group of players we had in the Midlands, didn't we? At Wolves, Birmingham, Aston Villa, and at West Bromwich Albion now. I mean, what would we do for 2 or 3 of them in the modern game? Because if you're looking at West Bromwich Albion, even Wolverhampton Wanderers really, not got outstanding strikers, Aston Villa and Birmingham City, even worse. So, when I was a kid, looking from my Birmingham City point of view, we just got rid of Little and Gray, who was the torment of my younger school days, and then replaced by Peter Withe and Gary Shaw. And if you look at you 4 players, you two could have easily played together, because what you didn't have, Pete had, and the same as Shaw and Gray. So you had, if you're looking at it now, from my time of loving football to now, you 4 football players up front were as good as he ever got at Aston Villa Football Club, in my opinion.
Do you know what? Do you know, like today, possession is king, isn't it? It seems to be that possession is king, whereas in the first thing I was taught as a football player was keep your forwards in the game. Yeah. Keep your forwards in the game. When I first played with Andy Lockhead, he was a god to me, Andy. He just said to me, wherever I am, I want you 10 yards away from me. You play around me because I am the key person in this team. I'm the person that they're told to keep in the game. Yeah. You need to feed off me. But the game isn't like that. Possession is king now, what I mean? Bringing your strikers into the game. I mean, not that I would not like playing today, but I think, I used to, and people used to, with people like me, feed me, if there wasn't me, feed me down the channel so I could run down the channel chasing the ball. It was nothing like being involved in the game. Nowadays, a striker has to be so, well, I don't know, I mean, they have to be so patient because they're going to get, they're going to get, and why they're so rare is if they get 2 chances and stick one of them in, they're a great striker. If they get 3 chances and don't score one, they're no good sort of thing. But we used to get chances, and we were in the game constantly. I think certainly Peter, the key player in that team more than anything else. Keep Withe in the game, but sure, he'll feed off and we'll win games. And basically, in the 70s and 80s to a degree, that's how football was. It was the main battle on the pitch was the centre half versus the centre forward, and that was the key battle. Yeah.
It's people say to me about teams play like Wimbledon and they play Route 1 football. Yeah. And I used to say to people, well, what's Route 1 football? Because if I'm a right back and I hit a ball over the top and the striker goes through and scores a goal, is that Route 1 football, or is that doing what you've been asked to do, score goals? Yeah. And I just think you find yourself with a happy medium. And people, I always remember Jimmy Hill asking me one day, he says, how do you assess yourself as a footballer? And I said to him, my role in this football team is everyone who's on that field can find me at some point. That is my role in the football team. And he said, oh, I didn't really think of it that way. I said, well, from goalkeeper to anyone in the team, that's what you've got to do. You've got to be on. And the thing that gets me more annoyed than anything over strikers nowadays, they don't study They don't study the centre-halves, and they don't study goalkeepers, and they don't study full-backs. They just think to go out and play. And the other thing that annoys me more than anything is that...
To listen to the rest of this podcast, please go to www.patreon.com/SRBmedia, or just follow the links in the description. Thank you.
Even when we're on a budget, we still deserve nice things. Quince is a place to scoop up stunning high-end goods for 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They have buttery soft cashmere sweaters starting at $50, luxurious Italian leather bags, and so much more. Plus, Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get the high-end goods you'll love without the high price tag with Quince. Go to quince.com/style for free shipping and 365-day returns.